Hey guys, day 553,867,000,000 of the quarantine. I'm very concerned that our society, maybe not here in Canada, but definitely down in the States, is slipping into fascism. And the thing I keep hearing people say, right, and it evolves and it's kind of shifting and changing. I look at someone like Robert Reich, for example, who says over and over again, he says, "Oh, it's socialism for the rich, in and rugged capitalism for the poor." That's fascism, and I think that we need to start calling it for what it is. It's not rugged individualism or rugged capitalism for the poor, socialism for the rich. It's fascism. There's a name for it. If the state and the businesses merge, that's fascism. And if the state is going to bail out huge businesses who don't need to be bailed out so that they can purchase cheap assets and expand their monopolies and expand their enormous power, that's fascism. And I just don't think we need to beat around the bush with this. And I feel like letting the people in power off the hook and allowing them to claim that what they're doing is something different than fascism only empowers them and only allows them to grow in their power. And it allows supporters of fascists off the hook as well, because it allows them to believe that they in some kind of ideology that is not what is actually being supported, that they get to pretend and they don't have to defend or comment on the fact that what they're doing is fascism. I think it's pretty clear. Edward Snowden gave a really interesting point to this conversation, which is that the COVID virus is allowing governments to set up the architecture of authoritarianism, as they've been doing this entire time, like Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, all of that legislation that came through after the completely fraudulent Iraq War. All of that is setting up this architecture as well, and this is just turning into an extension of it. And it's all on that steady march to neo-feudalism, right? The complete collapse of capitalism as any kind of attempt at organizational structure, based on the very simple premises: nobody has money, right? If no one has money, you cannot have a market, and that's just the bottom line on it. So what it will turn into is it will turn into a series of institutions owned by a small group of billionaires, who, through the quote-unquote democratic system, through the governmental legislative system, continuously force the populace to support their existence. And so inevitably what will happen is that a smaller and smaller percentage of the populace will work on behalf of these massive conglomerate corporations, and then they will be taxed in order to support the existence of said corporation. This is slavery. I think that's a blatant black and white kind of thing. I don't think we need to pretend like it's something different. And the slave systems that are coming out of this, I mean, America never abandoned slavery, right? It just sort of reformed it, and instead of just directly owning people, you just pay them a wage. And so you move from chattel slavery to wage slavery, right? Which the Republicans at the time, during the Civil War, understood. They knew that that was the case. And the actual slavers themselves argued that wage slavery was worse than chattel slavery, because wage slavery forced the slave to go and find their own um, shelter and find their own food, whereas chattel slavery, those things were provided for the slave. Um, I think that we're really going to be entering a very dark period of time here. That uh, the failed ideology of individualism, which is an ideology of abandonment, is really meeting its logical conclusion, which is that huge segments of the population will be abandoned, and they'll be abandoned on very basic premise, right? Like, oh, you're just lazy, go get a job, right? Once you extend that into this crisis economy, it becomes very clear that that was always an excuse, that the death cult always wanted sacrifice and it always wanted to abandon people. I mean, what do you think people living on the streets is about? What do you think homelessness is about? You think these people are living in homelessness and poverty and all of this kind of stuff because they're lazy? I think you have to be an idiot to believe that. I think you actually have to be like a fundamentally stupid person to believe that that's the truth. While there are people with Porsches driving around, while there are people uh, uh, who fly 5, 6, 7 times a day, going from place to place, like I just in private jets, no less. Like, while big massive companies like Amazon, General Electric, don't pay any taxes. Uh, Meanwhile, oh no, what really matters is the individual effort given by, a single mother who has to work 3 jobs to support her 2 children. That's what really matters, right? Forget about these big giant companies that don't pay taxes. Uh, I just think we're entering, and and I really get. I'm really coming to terms with this idea that, like, I think we deserve it as a people. I think we deserve what's coming because we're so stupid, um, and selfish and self-centered. Like, our parents' generation, right, the great generation, they went to war against the largest existential threat of their day. Uh, and meanwhile, the boomers refused to even give up plastic bags for the largest existential threat of our day. That indicates a deep selfishness that has taken hold of our society. That indicates a real collapse of even caring about their own children. Like, this is a mania. This is a manic cry for fascism. And there was a quote, I forget who said it, but there is a quote that bangs around in my head that says, the Germans were crying out for fascism before fascism was even a term. And I think I see that in America, that what Americans really are crying for and what they're really hoping will come to fruition in their society is fascism. And it's what they want. They want an authoritarian figure to come and destroy who they perceive as their enemies. Donald Trump is doing exactly that. He fits that bill quite nicely. Uh, because they want to believe that they are sort of this pure group of people. And the lines aren't being drawn along race explicitly, although let's be very clear, these people are extremely racist. Um, but the economic bigotry, and I've said this in previous videos, right? The economic bigotry is there. It's how you can look at an essential service like someone who's stocking shelves in a grocery store. And if you're stocking shelves in a grocery store, you're an essential service. You're an essential worker. If you did not exist, then those shelves do not get stocked and people cannot buy goods. And just because the work is considered simple or menial, or quote unquote anyone can do it, is completely meaningless. That bears no weight. It doesn't mean anything. That's just a method of a bigot trying to find a way to plunge you into slavery. And it is bigotry. If someone does not want to pay an essential worker uh, their for their time and for their effort, then they're a bigot and a thief, likely, who wants to steal your time and steal your wages for themselves. And as America starts to plunge deeper and deeper into its authoritarian fascism, it will become more and more obvious. But as has been completely illustrated by the people in power in America, by the quote unquote progressive movement, who is just a complete laughable joke, in my opinion, they're not going to do anything to prevent this rise of fascism, right? That as it comes in, maybe they'll point at it and say, oh, that's so bad. And then they'll vote for whatever legislation is being put forward because they're cowards. And I am very explicitly talking about people like Bernie Sanders and AOC, right? Who vote for these bills to bail out. And it's not even a bailout, right? You're not bailing out a billionaire when you give him $1 billion. He has $1 billion, right? You're just giving him more money. You're just allowing him to have more power in the society. And you're allowing him to use that liquidity to buy up more assets. And I fear that sort of the lack of economic education, the belief that people like the Chicago boys, like Milton Friedman, were economists instead of shills, the absolute insipid stupidity of the last 30, 40 years of this sort of trickle-down economics, it's really going to come to a head in America through something like this COVID crisis. And it's going to leave people with only one alternative, which is to strike and to get into the streets. Of course, the COVID crisis doesn't allow for that because we can't gather. But eventually, the all clear will come and the death cultists will want to put us all back to work so that we can waste our lives doing pointless activities so that they can go have another, vacation in the Hamptons. And we have to stop it. We have to stop this insane cycle of death and destruction. And we have to stop supporting these systems of death that are going to continuously generate crises. The reason why this COVID crisis is such a big deal is because it and is being treated so seriously is because it impacts the rich as well. If this was a disease that only impacted the poor, it wouldn't even be mentioned. It would be completely ignored. And that's plain, right? Our society doesn't care about the poor. Our society abandons the poor the second it possibly can. Even here in Canada, like we are passing legislation that looks like a basic income, but there are all kinds of ways to dismiss people and to discard them and to ensure that they're not part of the system. And there are all kinds of people who are going to fall through the cracks of that system by design, because it's not universal, because you have to meet a certain criteria. This, of course, is insipid and stupid because the virus doesn't care what your economic status is. And if you discard a huge segment of your population, then you're ensuring that the virus is going to go through that section of the population. And once the crisis really starts to take hold in America, as they do nothing to prevent it, as they continuously send their essential workers and even their non-essential workers into the fray, it's going to be a complete disaster. And the response will be fascism. The response will be a continued extraction of wealth and a handing over of power to the wealthiest people in the society and an abandonment of the workers. And there is no response left for these people. There is no response left but to get into the streets, to take over businesses, to occupy, to shut these places down. You know where these people live. You know their addresses. You know their personal homes. You know where they live. Go there, take over, and 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 I know people will look at me and be like, "Oh well, isn't that's quite extreme, isn't it? Oh well, my goodness." We have no alternative. There's no alternative left. Uh, we have suggested multiple alternatives. We could have like worker-owned shares. Workers could own large segments of the companies that they work for. That would prevent a lot of this. We could have a full-on basic income, right? Supporting workers, allowing them to leave bad labor or bad capitalists, so abandoning capitalists en masse. We could actually make these companies pay taxes. There's a thought. But none of that is actually going to happen. And so the only alternative that is left is to take to the streets and to make it very clear to the people who are in power that we're no longer going to cooperate with their fascist ambitions. And I don't think that we should pretend like we don't live in a fascist society any longer. That the rise of fascism in this country has been going on for decades. And finally now, through something like this COVID crisis, it's just obvious. And I think that if you are denying it now, you are living in a delusional fairy tale land, and you need to wake up and join reality, which is difficult for lots of people to do. We still have climate change deniers, we still have anti-vaxxers, flat earthers, we still have individualists, trickle-down economists, these high-level delusional thinkers who many people think are still credible, but are leading us into complete disaster. Anyway, that's the end of me. Good luck out there, guys. I try to have some fun.